All right, so for this lecture, again, we're going to be getting inside a Nuke, doing some post-processing, and this is going to be a recorded lecture. Now, I'm just going to grab my EXR files. It's basically the same things that you guys would have rendered the previous lab. So there are a few different ones. We've got the key light, fill light, dome light. Those just by setting up our render layers, getting the passes enabled. And we kind of talked about how when you do these, they're going to look a little weird because preview will never show them just because of the way we set up the file. It's like not going to show me the image. That's fine. You can see down at the bottom under the dimensions, it's saying it's a 0 by 0 pixel image. That's not what's going on. There is stuff there. It's just because when we did the renders, we had turned off this OpenEXR's RGBA checkbox that basically disabled any of the passes from going in the color channels. Normally we wouldn't really have to do that. It's just a slight bug I think they're trying to work out with RenderMan, where by disabling that and killing the color channels, it makes all the passes work. But if we did have that turned on, we probably would see something, but if we looked at the passes, they'd be all out of order. They'd have weird color issues. So temporarily, this is just the way we've got to do it. But what we're going to do is just kind of open up Nuke. And I'm going to take those 3 EXR files, and I'm just going to drag them into the node graph. See, I'm just dragging the files from Finder right into this space down here. Now, when I do that, you can tell that we've got 3 different nodes, kind of like a file node. Think of it sort of that way in the hypershade. But we've got 3 different file nodes. Now, in Nuke, they're not called file nodes. They're called read. And if you ever want to save something out of Nuke, there's something called write. So it's read and write. They're very clever. We'll come back to the write node later on when we're kind of near the end of the script. But let's kind of just talk about the interface with Nuke real quick first. So with Nuke, there are going to be 3 main areas that you guys are kind of focused on. We've got the viewer up here. Just think of this like your render view, the image tool. This is where you see what your images look like. We have our properties section on the right. This is just like the attribute editor in Maya. If you double click on it on a node, you'll see it loads a bunch of settings for it, like where's the file coming from, what's the resolution, color space settings. Most of this stuff we don't have to change because it's already set up fine. But if you double click on any one of those images, you can tell they all try to load their settings. Now, one thing that I think most of you guys are going to want to change is you'll notice that, because I double clicked on all 3 of those different nodes, see how it's just stacking all their properties together? And if you keep making stuff like grades, and I'm just kind of picking random nodes in here, crosstalk, I have no clue what that is, histogram equalizer. Like you can make all these nodes, but you'll see how they just keep adding and building. And like this whole properties area can get really overwhelming after a while because you're looking at like 10 different nodes all simultaneously, and some of them are named the same way. So one thing I would kind of recommend you do is, instead of just allowing this section to kind of get bloated, at the top of the properties is this little number 10. That is what's telling Nuke how many nodes it can show you at one time in the properties. Like 10 different attributes is ridiculous. Let's do like 2 or maybe even 1 if you just want to look at one node at a time. So I'm just going to reduce that down. And so now you can see there's only 2 of them. It doesn't matter how I click on them. It just won't show me more than 2. It's going to show me the 2 most recent nodes. Now down here is the node graph. If you hold Alt, left click, you can see that kind of moves around. You can middle mouse wheel in and out. If you kind of zoom in, you'll see there's a little like a preview area down here in the bottom corner that can kind of show you. You can kind of click in there and move around if you want. I don't use this thing a whole lot, but if you get into really big scripts and you can kind of see the little preview, it's an easy way to click around and it just automatically moves your node graph into the right spot. But what we're doing is pretty simple, so I'm not too concerned about that. Now, the first obvious thing we want to do is just figure out, how do I get these images to show up in the viewer? Yeah. Hit 1.
Say it.
Just say it.
You say press 1.
Yeah, press 1. You guys remember from the last time. Now, there's a lot of ways to do it. You can use the number keys, and you'll notice that the viewer, like this, the viewer here, viewer 1, that's the node for it. So even the viewer has a node, and you can have multiple viewers if you want. And you can connect to it just by dragging nodes to it. You know, I can drag the little arrow out of the bottom of those. That puts them in the viewer. You'll notice how they're all numbered differently. I can pull them out, disconnect it. But because they're just using numbers, you can also use the number keys, which is typically what I do. I don't like dragging stuff to this node. It takes too much time. So if you click on the node you want and just hit 1, like if I click on any of these and hit 1, you can see it's trying to put that node in the viewer. Now again, things look black because of the way we rendered it, but it is trying to show us the image. And we'll talk about how we see it properly in just a little bit. Now, if I want to start viewing, actually, let me kind of do that first, I guess. So let's say we put it in the viewer. I click on the key light image, hit 1. It's showing it to me. I want to look at the render, not just black. Up in the top left corner of Nuke, the problem is the channels. And it's showing us the color channels. And again, the way we set it up, we don't have color. It's just black. But within that, you can see there's a bunch of stuff that we did make. Those are all the passes. They're just hidden inside of that EXR file. So if I do something like beauty, you guys remember what beauty was when we were talking about that? Yeah, beauty is kind of like all your stuff together. You know, I can click on the beauty render or beauty pass, and there it is. And now it's like, oh, that's kind of what we expected to see in the color. That's our beauty. And if I click on this, because it's still set to beauty, hit 1, it's showing me the beauty of that. Beauty of this one. Yeah. Question?
I have your pictures and my beauties look like that.
Yeah.
It's not as like bright as yours was.
Which layer are you on?
Mine's the same, but it's brighter instead.
Well, yours looks correct right now. Like, isn't that, you're looking at that one, right?
No, this is the beauty.
I thought
They all have a beauty channel.
Yeah, they all have beauty. I'm on the dome light, and yours looks correct. Like this, mine's brighter on the TV just because of the way the TV is color corrected. It's a little darker even on my laptop. But yours looks right. Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, because that's what I
It's
thought.
kind of bright for a
Yeah.
dome light.
So I got like key, fill, dome light. Now, if you guys, like when you look at your renders, if there's something drastically off, like the intensity looks wildly different, you know, we might have to sit down and figure out what happened. But one other thing I can do with using the number keys is instead of just hitting 1, which is fine, sometimes you want to like flip back and forth to compare something real quickly. I could do 1, 2, 3. And now if I just hit 1, 2, 3 on my keys, you can see I'm just flipping back and forth between 3 different inputs. 1, 2, 3.
Morning, afternoon,
Yep. Sure.
It's
Yep.
like a strobe party.
Yeah.
Oh,
All
I'm
right.
doing that too.
There we go. And I'm just going to disconnect them again, so I'm not staring at 3 different inputs. But I'll just go back to using 1. But just kind of be aware you can use other numbers if you want to see multiple inputs simultaneously. All right. Now we want to start making some nodes and fixing a few things, so the renders just look a little bit easier to use. So if we want to make nodes in Nuke, there's a bunch of ways to do it. This whole left side right here, these are all different nodes you can make. And there's a lot of them. And we're not going to talk about like 95, 99% of these. Like there's tons of stuff. I don't even know what some of these do just because I haven't had a reason to use them yet. You're going to get a lot of these when you get to the compositing class. Now, going through here is fine. I don't really care for this whole menu. I mean, if you like staring at pretty icons, you can do it. But like, this is not very quick. You can see a bunch have like shortcuts, like the G key, C key, and they kind of list them. B for blur. What I usually do is I right click in the node graph. So like down here, if you right click, this is the same thing. It's just like a list version of all the stuff that was over here. And I think this is a little faster than like clicking through all these guys. Or better yet, if you know what the node is you need, just like the hypershade, you can do tab and start typing stuff in. Like I can type in like read, because that's like the file node, right? I could make a grade node, a blur, like pretty much anything. If you know what the node is, you just tab, type it in, you'll make it. It's pretty easy. So let's just kind of start with this guy right here. Now, I'm going to look at the key light image, And I want to go back to RGBA because obviously the whole time you guys are working on it, you don't want to be constantly clicking to beauty just to see what the render looks like. Like that's really annoying. So what we want to do is right off the bat, I want to move that beauty pass into my color permanently. That way it's always there and we don't have to keep clicking through that thing. So to move channels around internally in an image, there's a node we need called shuffle. So what I want you guys to do is if you select the keylight image, just kind of have it selected, do tab, type in shuffle, just pick shuffle, not shuffle copy, pick shuffle. Here's a shuffle node. You can see that image goes to a shuffle node.
That's a really strange way.
Yeah, this looks probably very weird. What's that? Here's what shuffle copy looks like. It's just a different node.
Oh,
It's, yeah, let me kind of zoom in over here. So this is the shuffle. You can tell they look very similar, but see how this has a separate area over here where there's like different RGBA channels? Look at the node. Can you guys spot the difference between these two? Right. So this is like taking channels internally and just mixing them up and moving them around. This is if you had two different images combining together and you want to like transfer channels between two different inputs. Like moving the beauty from here and putting it into the beauty on that guy or something weird like that. We're not going to have any reason to use that for this one, but that will be useful later on when you guys start doing like keys and doing rotoscoping for alphas. So let me kind of put the shuffle back. Just kind of make sure it's connected to your key light so the key goes down into the shuffle. And one thing too, as far as like organizing things and like keeping a nice workflow, you know how when you guys were in the hypershade, you were typically building like left to right? I kept telling you guys to make sure the arrows are pointing to the right and you had the material on the right side. Your textures kind of were over here, going to the right into it. This is built top down. So this is going to be, we're starting at the top with our images, and we're going to start doing things to them, breaking them up, combining them back together, until eventually near the end, they'll all kind of funnel together into one single image near the bottom, and that's what we render out. So we're going to start top, go to the bottom. Now on the shuffle node, let me zoom in on this guy. We need to figure out what this is trying to tell us, because this is not very easy to understand when you first look at it. And I came from a different compositing program called Shake before Nuke, and Shake didn't have this in it. There was something similar to it, but when I went over to Nuke and I kind of found this guy, I didn't really understand what this is trying to tell me, because you see a bunch of arrows going like 20 different directions. There's boxes you can't click in. It says RGBA in like 3 different spots. Basically what this is if you have an image going into it, and you know how eventually this is going to go into some other node, like a color correction node, or it might go to like some merging node where it can merge images together. So because there's one input, and eventually there's going to be an output once I go somewhere with it. When you look at the shuffle, what it's trying to do here is it wants to know what your input channels are. That's the top left. And then on the right over here is your output channels. So with RGBA as the input, RGBA as the output, nothing is really changing, because if you look at where the RGBA channels are coming from on the output, just follow the line. So here's the alpha. Where is it pulling the alpha channel from?
The bottom.
The alpha of the input. Blue output is coming from blue on the input. Green, green, red, red. Basically what this means is that nothing's changing. Like it's just defaulting to nothing. It's just keeping them all the same. Now what we want to do, remember, is I'm trying to pull out that beauty pass and put it in the color. So what I can do over here is say, all right, I don't want to do anything with the RGBA channels on this. What I want to do is grab my beauty. And you can see if I do the drop down, it will list the beauty. Now when you go to the shuffle, if you don't see any of this popping up at all, it means either this isn't connected to the image, so it doesn't know what these are, or your EXR file never had those passes to begin with. And that's an issue inside of Maya, where we have to figure out why those didn't render. But I'm going to pick beauty. Now when I do that, you can see it's immediately fixed it. Let me kind of zoom in here. I picked beauty. Let me go back to RGBA. 4 channels. When you pick beauty, though, look what happened to the alpha. There is no alpha. So there's no alpha channel in any of these passes, which is totally fine. We don't need those. Now, because there's not an alpha, but see how the output thinks there's supposed to be an alpha? Where is it pulling the alpha from? Blue. And you can actually look at that because you can see color channels in the viewer. So if you ever want to look at the color channels, you can use RGB. I'm just using the letters in the keyboard, RGB. And look at A. A looks like my blue channel. I'm hitting 2 different keys on my keyboard. A and B are the same because they are the same. It pulled the blue channel into the alpha. Now, if you ever want to go back to color, just hit that same key again. So if you do like red, hit R again, it goes back to color. Over here, since we don't need an alpha, what I'm going to do on the output is just set it to RGB. That way there isn't an alpha even on the output. That just kind of keeps it cleaner. There's no sense to even use it. All right. Now, are you guys all seeing if you're looking at the RGBA channels in your viewer, did everyone notice that their image is now visible? Are you looking at RGBA in the viewer? Okay.
Is your shuffle one connected to your viewer?
And you have that right there? Okay, let me check real quick. Should work.
What's the blur?
Oh, so you're not viewing it, so if you hit that. Yeah, I think you might have been viewing a different node. Nothing was connected to the viewer, so you just click it and then hit 1 to put that in the viewer. But it looks like it worked. Yeah, so just kind of, if something isn't working, just kind of verify you're looking at the right image. If you end up like deleting a node, the viewer might lose its connection and not know where, what node to look at. But we're looking at the shuffle now. I'm clicking on that, hitting 1. It looks like it's the right image, so that's good. Now, I want to rename this just so I kind of know what this shuffle was doing. I'm going to call this, and you can kind of see where you can rename it at the top here. Just double click on it. Up here where it says Shuffle 1, let's call it Shuffle Beauty. So I'm just aware that's the one that shuffled out my beauty pass and put it in the color. So now I can just see that stuff. I don't have to keep going to this anymore because it's now in the color. Okay? Now, one kind of nice thing about Nuke as well is we can set up all these little preview images because you can see how it's trying to draw like a swatch, that little black box. Kind of like how the Hypershade has little preview swatches. Nuke has the same thing, and we can turn them on and off on like any node we want. Yeah, question?
Is there a reason to stay in the RGBA thing up there?
Like why you'd want to do that?
Yeah.
Because
If
like,
we changed it to RGB, well then why not over there?
what do you mean? Say it again. Like
In the shuffle, we switched it to RGB, right?
over here? Yes.
Yeah. So then why not up there?
Oh, you could.
So there's just really no difference.
Yeah, they're the same. Yep. I just have it set to RGBA here because that's what it defaults to, but it doesn't really matter. So you could definitely put it to RGB, and it's still the same thing. Now, if we want to start using these little preview swatches, what you can do is use Alt-P. It's not called a swatch. For some reason, they're calling it a postage stamp. I don't know why. Yep. Because swatch would make too much sense. So we're going to call it a postage stamp in Nuke. But if you click on like the read, I don't need to see black. Like that doesn't mean anything to me. So what I'm going to do is click on this and do Alt-P to remove it. Click on the beauty, because this is the one with the image, and I'm going to do Alt-P on that guy. That one I think is kind of nice to look at the little preview.
It's so pretty.
Isn't it?
It's
So much beautiful detail in that. It's all pixelated. But, and by the way, what we're going to end up doing here, because obviously you can imagine everything we're doing to this is going to happen on those guys. Once we build this whole setup with that one image, we're just going to copy that over to the other side and just connect it. Like we don't have to rebuild this over and over again. You build it once, copy it over for the other ones. So this was just getting the beauty copied out. Now again, inside of this, we have all these other passes. Like I have my depth, my matte channels. Previously, before we changed it this month, there used to be a different render where the matte channels were separate. And if we had it that way, we'd also have to use another node down here called copy to like move the channels over. And a couple of you guys I need to sit down with and kind of go over that. So you can just set up a copy temporarily if you want, or just skip it. All right, so we're going to kind of go past that. Now, one thing I also want to do is start kind of renaming a few things. Like up here, for example, you'll see how I've got this mat ID 0, 1, 2, 3. Now, if I click on them, like it's showing me those different alphas we made. There they are. But we don't really know what those numbers mean. I mean, you can click on it, and you kind of know, like mat 0 is like the scraper. But I kind of want to rename these things. So let's try renaming these real quick. There is... If I do a copy, this is going to sound kind of weird, but a copy can be used to take a channel, and this is how you kind of move channels around, but this also has a rename function built into it, where I can start renaming channels if I wanted to. Yeah, I guess we can do that. It's not really necessary, but let's just try it out and see if it works. And you don't have to do this, is optional, but I'm going to just copy the same image into itself. I'm really just using it so I can kind of use a new channel to start renaming things. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to take A and B, just slam them both up in there. Okay, so that goes into a copy. Actually, let me just look at my screenshot, make sure I'm even doing that in this guy. Yeah, it is a copy. Okay. So A and B are both going in the same thing. Okay, so we're just going to keep that there. Let's kind of snap it so it's right below that. Now on the copy, what I'm going to do is just use this to rename these mat IDs for me. So over here where it says alpha, if you click on that drop down, you're going to pick, and you can see how it's showing me every channel of the mat IDs, because the mat channels are RGB, just like everything else. I don't need all of them. So what I'm going to do is just basically make a mat ID red, pick the next one down, mat ID 1 red, mat ID 2 red. Just kind of go down through the list and just pick the first channel of all your mats. This is on the copy. So on your copy, like in that drop down, when you click on it, pick the red channel of your 4 different mats. So 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you're picking those, and you're going to move these channels into a new one. And we're going to name it according to the object, so it's easier for the compositor to know what we're looking at. Now on this side, if I pull those channels from the mats, one of them is going to go into the alpha channel, which I don't want to do. And the other ones aren't going anywhere, because you can see it's set to none. So what you're going to do is on the one up here, change it from alpha, and at the way bottom, there's something called new, because this is showing you every channel in the file. We want to do a new channel. Hit pick new. This is going to pop up. And this is where you guys just get to name it whatever you want. Now, I already know like what number represents which object, and you guys probably have the same order I did. So what one is mat ID 0? Scraper, right? Now let's just try naming it something like ID scraper, or like scraper alpha. It's whatever you want to call it. I'm going to use like ID, I guess. Now if I do ID scraper, watch what happens if I hit OK. You're like, what? What does that mean? What it's freaking out about is, see how when you move it into a new channel, it needs to have a dot something, like dot red, dot alpha, dot blue. That's the thing it's missing. So I can't just call it ID scraper. I want to call it ID scraper dot alpha. And hit yes. And we're just going to do that for each one of these guys. So let's do the next one. Here's the pulley. Click on that one. Go down to the bottom to new. And we'll rename this one. ID pulley dot alpha. I'm just going to do that over and over again. And again, this is not really required. It's just nice because now you can actually tell what these are, because you can see the name in the list. ID, I think this is the... That's a good question.
I would-
Let's find out. So if we're not sure, I'm gonna like look at it. Just go to the viewer. What is mat ID 2? It's the metal. 3 is the glass. Okay, let me go back to color. Oh, and a quick tip about this is if you start going through these guys and looking at different channels, don't forget to go back to color. Because if you accidentally leave it on one of these passes, when you kind of get farther down the script, it's gonna look like you're not doing anything. And it's because you're not looking at the color. You're still looking at one of these passes. So always put it back to RGBA or RGB when you're done. So let me go back over here. Here's this one. We're going to pick new ID metal.alpha. And this is going to be ID glass.alpha. So that's, let me zoom in on that. That's what mine looks like.
Is there a reason for the ID?
Yeah, the reason I'm calling it ID is one, because if I just had scraper pulley metal glass, which would be fine, if you were to look at, like, let me actually show you the copy. I'm going to view it. Look at what it's doing over here. See how, because I'm putting the same tag in the front, they're all grouped together, like alphabetically. It's just an organization thing. If I had called it glass metal pulley scraper, you would have seen these alphabetically just thrown in with the rest of these guys, and it wouldn't have looked as clean. And ID is just another name for like an alpha or a mat. So it's just a personal preference for me. Okay. So that, everything we're doing at the beginning is probably going to be like the hardest part of the whole project. It's just organizing things and kind of getting the files prepped. You guys have any questions about that part? Just like the renaming process. It'll all be in the video. It's even in the video that I have up there currently. Okay. Is that now the one thing that I do want to fix is even when I've done this, if you look over here, I have them and I can click through them like ID glass, metal, like they're working. I know they look red. It's still an alpha, but they're there. But I still have these guys, right? And I still have these other mat IDs hanging out for no reason because I just made them like a new set of channels for them. So do I even need these ones anymore? I don't, right? That's just extra stuff that's really unnecessary. So when you look at the screenshot, again, if you're kind of using this as a guide, we just got through the copy. There's something down here called remove. So we can remove stuff. So under the copy, let's click on it, tab, remove. Not remove the 3 to 2 pull down, but just remove that. So in this, you just get to pick what channels you want to remove. So let's do mat ID 0, 1, 2, and 3. I'm just clicking through the list and just picking mat ID 0, 1, 2, 3. So that should remove it. So let me just verify. Like if I look at the copy, because I'm viewing this one, I'm hitting 1 on that node, see how like they still exist? If I view the remove node, where I just told it to remove these guys, they're gone.
That's pretty awesome.
Okay. So now we're finally at the point where I can start doing some fun stuff. Like that was just kind of the prep work at the beginning. But now we have all the passes renamed. Everything looks good to go. We can start building our comp. All right, so from here, the first thing we want to do is going to be breaking apart all these material passes. Like, you know how I was telling you if we had like the spec and diffuse rendered separately, that means we could kind of control them independently. So we want to take all these passes, break them apart so they're in different images. That way I could like color correct them, and then we're going to combine them back together. So how do I pull a pass out of this node? It is going to be using the same thing we did for the beauty. It's a shuffle node. So what you're going to do is below this guy, hit tab, make another shuffle. And you can just kind of move that over here because we're going to have a few of these guys in a row. We're going to make a shuffle. And over here, what you want to do is I don't care about the beauty. That's not important anymore. I want to start grabbing these guys, all the material passes. So in your shuffle, click over here, pick direct diffuse. And again, see there's no alpha. So you may want to change this to RGB on the right just to get rid of the alpha channel. And look what happened to the image. See, here's me viewing the remove. When I view that shuffle, it looks like it's just the diffuse information now. And if you change it to any of these guys, you'll see it looks like whatever pass you pick. Like there's my spec, indirect spec, there's trans. Like I can just pick any one of those guys and it will show up now in the color. So we'll stick with direct diffuse. And I'm also going to do Alt P so I can see the little preview of that guy. Alt P. And let's also rename it. How about not shuffle beauty? Shuffle direct diffuse. So mine is kind of looking like this so far. Oh, and by the way, you can hit space in any section, and that will kind of expand it full screen. It's kind of cool. Yeah, question.
Whenever I'm viewing on in the viewer when I'm choosing to do my things,
Yep.
my ID fully isn't showing up, but whenever I click on my scraper, both of them show up.
Did you copy it? That's weird. Can I see what you're? It's probably an issue with like the right side.
Please no.
Oh. Okay. I don't know why the hell did that, honestly. I'm not too worried about it. It's not a big deal because we're not going to use those guys a whole lot for the alphas anyway. It's probably just a weird glitch. I bet if you like redid the copy node and from scratch, it would probably work. But I wouldn't worry about that. That's fine. All right. So we've got one kind of set up. Now, how many passes are we trying to pull out of this thing, like total? So they're not this guy. We want to get those 5 right there. We have 5 material passes. So we are going to, once you kind of get one set up, we're just going to really quickly copy that to get the other ones kind of also set up. So what I'm going to do is click on my shuffle node just to select it. And we're going to do Alt-C. Alt-C. That's like a duplicate thing. Alt-C, Alt-C. Just Alt-C that so you have 5 in a row. Because there's 5 total passes we're trying to pull out. Should look like that. And these aren't connected yet.
Don't hold it down. You said don't hold it down? Yeah. Do it. There you go.
Yeah, I'm good. Do it. I dare you.
Just organize it so it looks like this. Like they're all, that remove branches off into 5 different shuffles.
Wait, and so to see the picture, it's
Alt-P.
Alt-P. Oh.
You have to connect it.
Oh.
Yeah, so if it's not connected, it's going to be black. So you can tell, like, they're all connected, right? Doesn't it feel like Nuke works fairly well, like it's quick?
Yeah.
It's not like the Hypershade. So what's my big problem? Just looking at the preview, what do you think? Yeah, it's the same image over and over again. So that's not going to be very helpful. So what you want to do is change it so each one of these guys uses a different pass. Now, be careful about this because this is a little different than Maya. When you click on a node, like let's say I want to click on the second one, that is not what you're seeing over here. In Maya, when you click on a piece of geometry, like you immediately see the properties for it show up in the attribute editor. That's not how Nuke works. If you want to see the node in Nuke, you have to double click. Be very careful about that. Because what happens is, if you just keep single clicking and changing it, what you're doing is you're probably changing the first node over and over again. You're not even going to the second node. Like, yeah. So double click. Does that say direct diffuse? Yes. Double click on the next one. Change this to indirect diffuse. I mean, you can pick any of them. But I'm going to do indirect diffuse next. So both of my diffuse passes are next to each other. And I'm going to rename the node every time I do that. Indirect diffuse. Double click on the next one. This is direct specular. Rename it. Indirect specular. And the last one is transmissive. And I'll give you guys just a little bit to do all that. But there's basically 5 different passes. I've renamed them all. So if you end up clicking through it, like with the 1 key, let me expand that out. That's what mine looks like. So they're all using different passes. They're all named according to the pass type. But if you like use the 1 key to look at them, they should all look different. So let me just verify that. 1. That looks like direct diffuse. There's indirect diffuse. That's my bounced light. Direct specular. That's my specular reflection to the light source. Indirect specular. That's the objects reflecting each other. And there's my transmissive. So they all do look different. If you notice that any of them are doubled up, like there's a duplicate, it probably just means you accidentally have that shuffle set to the same pass as a previous one. You can just change it. Just pick the right pass on it. Or delete it and start over. But they should all be unique. Okay, so we've got the passes broken up. Now I could start modifying these and making the spec pass like green and doing a bunch of weird things to it. But I don't really want to do that yet, because the first thing you want to do when you start breaking passes apart is you want to make sure if you combine them back together, what should it look like? Yeah, it should look like the beauty image. This should still look like the render that you came out of Maya with. If it doesn't, that means we have a broken comp and the whole thing's busted and you don't even want to continue moving on. So it's almost just like verifying the whole pipeline works before you start playing around with anything. So to do that, we want to make a merge node. Now I'll kind of show you how we do this a little bit more efficiently. If you hit M, like anywhere, you can do a merge, or you can do tab, type in merge. Like here's what the merge node looks like. And you'll notice there's only 2 inputs on it. Now you can connect multiple things into a merge. It'll start making additional inputs like A1, A2, A3. It'll connect a bunch together. But a faster way to do this is if you just select all these nodes and hit M, it just made the merge with all of them connected to it. Or just make a merge and drag the little connection arrows to it one by one. Yeah, M's, the shortcut's a little better. Select it all, hit M, it just looks nice.
What are we connecting the viewer to?
Right now, my viewer is on that merge node where I'm looking at it. So this is a little misleading. Some of you may be getting different results than what I'm getting right now. So on the merge node, if you look at it, it doesn't really seem like there's a whole lot to it. It's like some very basic channels. You have a question about the shuffle and the merge? Let me zoom in here. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't have it on merge. Like I said, I just wanted to show me what.
Okay. So what is the merge node? Like this is basically, think of it kind of like your layers in Photoshop. You just get to pick how you want the images to combine together. And just like Photoshop, if you look at the merge's attributes under operation, you'll start seeing a bunch of very familiar things like multiply blend node. There's plus, which is the same thing as addition. Color burn, color dodge. We've seen those in Photoshop. Divide, exclusion. Now it doesn't have the exact same Photoshop blend modes, but about a third of them are kind of thrown in here, with a few other ones that are sort of unique to Nuke. But now it's set to an over, and does that look like the beauty? Yeah, it looks like it. Now I could verify that, right? Because if I click on this, let me go back to my beauty shuffle and look at that one with 2. I'm flipping back and forth. Do you see anything changing? Yep. That means the comp works. It is bringing them all together. Now, I do want to change one thing. It's working correct right now, but most of the time when you guys start combining your images together, it is not going to look like the beauty. And I just kind of want to show you the right way you're supposed to do this. This is actually just kind of luck that this worked. What's supposed to happen is when you use an over, most of the time the over doesn't work, because what does an over sound like if you think of Photoshop blend modes? Like what does over do? Yeah, Normally with an over, it just puts one image over the other in like sequence. So what usually happens if you have it set to an over is whatever the first, I think A1 image is going to be the top one. And so typically this would look like, in this case, my spec image only. You just show that one render, even on this guy. The reason it kind of worked for us though is because we don't have any alpha channels, and so the over is kind of broken. It's just, that's not really the right way you're supposed to do it. Like you don't use an over by breaking the alpha. What you're supposed to do is when you take your passes, you're supposed to have the operation set to plus, which is just addition. Like add all the images together. And you can tell it looks the same. Like if I go between plus and over, there's not any difference right now. But later on down the road, when you guys start doing this on your own personal projects, that should be set to a plus to avoid any weird complications. I mean, you can look at other ones, but they're not going to look too good. Like here's merge hypotenuse. That's actually not surprisingly too bad. Merge divide. Yeah, like I don't know why we do disjoint over, difference, you know, out. I'm not going to get into what all these are doing. XOR, that's apparently not doing anything. Stencil, which is only the indirect spec, I guess. Okay. Just put it to plus. Don't worry about the other guys. All right. So they're all adding together. Okay, let me actually make sure we're still good. All right. So we're all good there. Now, what I want to do from here, since we kind of built all this stuff, like we got one tree working where we rename stuff, deleted channel. I'm hitting space. Hit space.
Oh, what?
Dude, you're slow, bro.
I didn't even know that.
Like the Pokemon.
Okay, so you can hit space to maximize that part of the Nuke workspace. But this is all kind of working at this point. We have our first working comp. This is a milestone moment for you. You've built your first Nuke comp. It's very basic, but that is a comp right there. Now we want to use that for these guys. Now the good thing about this is because you know how back on the original read nodes, all the passes are named the exact same thing coming out of Maya? That is very good because this means if I duplicate this whole chunk, it will automatically work with every single one of them. Now, if they were named differently, I would have to still go in there and fix all my shuffles because they wouldn't be pulling the right pass out of it. But we did it the right way in Maya. So what do I want to copy? Like when you look at this whole chunk here, what is the stuff I want to duplicate?
Everything except the read.
Yeah, not because that is this guy, right? The only difference is we want this going into all this stuff. So if you just marquee drag over all that, not the read node at the top, just those guys. Select all of them and do Alt-C. There's your second group. Now it's not connected yet. We'll fix that. What's that?
I got an error.
You got the read.
Yeah, you're going to see some errors right now because it's not connected. If I double click, it'll probably, that. Yeah. It doesn't error because it doesn't know where this is because nothing's connected to it.
I just connected.
Yeah, now I connected it and it said error.
Okay, we'll see what's going on here. Alt-C.
Was it Alt-C?
Alt-C, yep. And I'm just going to connect those. And my errors are going away. Like maybe double click and see if it refreshes. Sometimes it gets stuck.
Oh, there it is. Yeah.
It should work. Now, if you have it connected and you've like viewed it, you're double clicking on the node and you're still getting an error and you know you've got it hooked up right, what I would do is go back to your other EXR files and view them to make sure that they even like looked correct out of Maya. So for example, on my fill light beauty, like are there passes in it? Because it could be one of your batch renders just didn't even have the passes at all. In that case, you got to re-render that one. Alt-P, kind of minimize it. We'll go over here, Alt-P, because we don't want to see that, and drop that down. So basically, I've got like just 3 versions of the same tree. And now it's pretty quick. Once you build it once, you just copy it over, and it all kind of works. But if you want, you can verify it. Like let me make sure the merge at the end looks correct. The merge at the key we know was good because I did that first. Here's the merge of the fill light. Yep, that looks like the fill light. And there's a dome light. So I know they all work because like the final node on each one looks like what it's supposed to look like. Yeah.
Mine doesn't look the same for the no, for the fill.
For the fill, let's go back and forth. What is that changing? It's like the metal?
Error,
Yeah.
go away, please.
That's weird. Can you go to your reflection passes? Like click on that, hit 1. Click on this one and hit 1. Oh.
Oh, it's not connected.
Yeah, that's why. You had one node that wasn't connected. We'll never know. It's really easy to disconnect something because, like, when you're just like clicking and moving around the node graph, it's so easy just to accidentally click and like disconnect an arrow just by not being aware that you're like, oh, I'm gonna move here. Like, oops. Like these guys will break and disconnect real easy. Be careful you're not clicking on one of these guys because you can just yank it apart. Yep. All right.
Cool.
So we've got the lights broken apart. Now what do you think feels like kind of the final step if we're trying to get back to like our starting point? Yeah. Now it's like we have those guys. Now we have the lights combined back together. And now you want to merge all these guys into that one image, which is going to look kind of like what you guys had back in Maya before we did any of the render layers. You got it. Merge the merge. So you can just marquee drag over those and hit M. Like just the merges. Hit M, and then kind of, I'll move this in the middle, so it's like that. So see how they're all kind of funneling back together into one chain, and we're going to work our way down. It is. And this is just like the passes. That merge should be set to plus. You want to add the lights together. And again, I know it looked fine with an over, but it's supposed to be plus. Just do it. Hit 1 on the plus, to make sure you're seeing it. It should look like all your lights are combined together. Like that's pretty much what we had back in Maya before we did any of the render setup stuff. So this whole comp is still working. All right. Any questions up to this point? Just like with the shuffles and kind of combining it together. Does it seem pretty easy so far? Alt-C. So select whatever nodes you want and Alt-C. Okay. So we're good there. Let's kind of go back here. Now from here, let me kind of load up the docs. This is when we find, like, everything we've been doing so far is just like the prep work, like making sure the comp's set up, renaming channels. Once you get through that, now we can do the fun things, like changing colors, making passes look different, making a material property do something kind of unique. So let's kind of start. We are on step 7 of this doc right now, where it says create a subtle vignette. You guys remember what a vignette is, or you know what that? Yeah, this.
Yes.
That kind of like gradient where it sort of darkens around the corner of the frame. This is really easy to do. Now, Nuke doesn't have a vignette node, but if you kind of think about how would you do this in Photoshop if you want to darken the edge?
Burn.
I mean, you could color burn it.
Yeah, that does work. Yeah, you could do a color burn or brush and physically paint on it.
Paint black and just mess with the transparency a little bit.
Yeah, that's yep. So what we want to do is first think about, all right, if we were in Photoshop, what type of color correction tool would allow us just to darken the image in general? Because right now we're just trying to darken the corners of the frame. Let's figure out, how do we even darken the render at all? Like, what node can do that? And if you right click and you start looking at some options here, so if I right click to look at all my different nodes I could possibly make, under the color menu, these are all of Nuke's color correction nodes. There's a lot of them. Hue correct and HSV. We know what HSV is because we had that in Photoshop. Yeah, there's like some saturation by itself and inverting and a bunch of stuff we're not going to worry about. Basic math nodes, like just adding and multiplying things. The one we're going to use though is called the grade node. This is sort of just the the most basic kind of standard color correction node in Nuke. You guys will be using this a lot when you get to compositing, which is also G, by the way. G is a shortcut for it. So what I want you to do is make, actually, let's not, sorry, I know I'm talking about the grade node. Let's change it up. Let's do an exposure instead. Hit tab, type exposure, make an exposure node, and just kind of have it so that merge is going into an exposure. So it should look like that goes into this guy. Going into an exposure. Okay. View your exposure node. Click on it, hit 1 to put that in the viewer. So it looks the same right now. Nothing's happened yet because we haven't changed anything on the exposure. Now here's what the attributes look like. We got what channels do you want to affect? There's some color space options. Don't worry about any of this. The main thing we're kind of looking at are these guys right here in the middle, the red, green, blue sliders. Watch what happens to the render when I just grab any of them and start dragging it around. So this is intensity. This is just making the image brighter or darker. And if you animated this with like an expression, you could have like a flickering light where it's something like pulsing. Okay, now what I want to do is just darken the image first, because you remember with the vignette, I'm trying to darken the edges of the frame. So let's just drop this down a little bit to maybe, I'm going to go to like negative 0.7, like pretty low. Like that's I just want to make sure it's really dark, so eventually when I get it working, I should be able to see this is doing it. We're darkening that down a lot. Now, the problem we're running into is the exposure node doesn't understand that it's supposed to be the edges of the frame, like a vignette. It's doing the whole image. Now, again, if you were in Photoshop and you did something like a levels or something to darken it, what's the missing piece in Photoshop that we need to tell it where to affect it? A mask. Yep. Yeah, which it basically a gradient in a mask. You guys are both right. Yep. Now the good thing is Nuke has masks all over the place. Like every node we've made has a mask. And you've actually been looking at it, you just didn't realize it was there. So look at the edge of this exposure, that little thing sticking out the side. Pull that out to the right. Whoa, there it is. There's the mask. It's this little, it's on all these guys. There's masks for merge nodes and masks for, actually you don't have it on a shuffle, but most of them have this little guy on the side. That's the connection. So whenever you connect something into this on the side, that will control where it affects it. So what we want to do is think about, all right, what type of shape would allow me to control the edges of the frame? Like, if I did a rectangle, it would. If I use it as a mask, you actually would get like a really harsh line. Like it actually have the shape of a square on the edge. The vignette is like a gradient, right? Look at my draw options over here. There's a bunch of things we can draw. We can even make lens flares, which we may do later. There's something called radial. Like here's what a radial looks like, or there's a basic ramp. But let's do radial. This is a radial. Doesn't that kind of feel like close to a vignette? It's like a radial gradient from the center to the outside. Now the radial is what we want. This is the right node. The problem is, look at the viewer when I go between my radial, which isn't even connected to anything, it's just on the side, and look at the exposure. Now I know like they're not connected, but can you already see a problem happening when it, yeah. Look at this, the framing of this. See how something's popping? And it looks like the radials tool is off center. If you zoom in at the bottom right corner, it's telling you the resolution of your image. This is HD 720. That's 1280 by 720. That's fine. Look at the radial. What is 2K Super 35? We'll never know. But whatever it is, that's what the radial's doing. So it is set to the wrong resolution. It's kind of like in Photoshop, where if you were to make this random image with like a gradient, you still have to tell the software what resolution it's supposed to be. We didn't tell Nuke to have it set to the same resolution as this guy. Now on the radial node, it's really limited on what you can do for resolution. There's a bunch of cropping tools, but we're not going to worry about that. The problem is something we have to fix in our settings of Nuke. So just delete the radial for now. Get rid of it. I know, I'm sorry. Well, we're going to make it again in a second. Delete the radial. And then in the node graph, hit S for settings. Hit the S key. You're going to see Nuke's project settings pop up on the right. And you can already see the problem. See right there? 2K Super 35. What's it supposed to be?
HD 720.
HD 720. You're just setting your project's resolution. So this means once you get that set in the project settings, every time we make a new node, whether it's a radial, a lens flare, whatever, it will be set to the right size. So now that I've done that, let's try making a radial again. Tab, radial. Now when I look at it and go back and forth, you see how it's not popping? Because now it knows it's the right size. Once you set it in your project settings, the next time you make your radial, it'll look right. If you still have your old radial there, it's not going to fix it. You need to delete it and make a new one. So there it is. Amazing. Now let's try connecting it. So you know how that exposure has that little mask connection? So just grab the mask and drag it over to the radial, and it'll click. This is now driving the mask of the exposure node. Now let's look at what happened.
Yes.
Can you guys see what it's doing?
There's a little marquee in the middle now.
Yeah. Let me move my exposure slider around. You can tell that it's kind of working. Like if I move my exposure slider, it's making that center point lighter or darker. Almost, if I make it brighter, it's almost like a weird flashlight effect. Let's move it down. So what is the problem with the shape? It needs to be, okay, it needs to be inverted, right? Now the good thing is that's something we can change in the exposure node. Because if you look at the exposure's attributes, see at the bottom there's like a little mask. It's telling you where it's pulling it from. It's pulling the alpha channel from the radial right now, which is fine. But if you look farther to the right, there's an invert button. If I hit it, it's inverting your mask input. Okay, so now we're getting it's closer. Now we are getting it to darken the edge of the image. But what's my problem with it? Yeah, it's just too small, and so it's got this giant flat spot right now. So it's like only keeping that bright, and then the whole outside chunk is like the same dark intensity. So to fix this, you could grab the radial corners of the box and just like scale it out. It's like the transform tool. What I like to do though is underneath the radial, just kind of select it, hit T, or type in transform. But transform tool is like the free transform in Photoshop. I just like doing it with a separate node. But if you double click on this and look at the attributes, let me look at the transform so you can see it. So I'm viewing this guy, and if I take the scale, I want to bring it up. Look at the transform and then grab your scale attribute. And now you want to bring it so like not here, see how it's still flat. It needs to be a constant gradient. And you don't want to go too far, because what's going to be the problem if I do this?
Nothing's gonna happen.
Yeah, it's just like it's so similar in tone that you're not going to see it. So the sweet spot is right around 3 for the scale. It's not always correct, but 3 is the magic number for this one. Yep. 3. Now let me go back to exposure and try messing around with it. It worked. Okay. So and you can tell, like if I look at the corner, it is getting darker. If I make it really dark on the edge, like it's going from this to that. And if you ever want to disable something, like if I'm looking at the exposure, if you click on it, hit D on your keyboard, D. D is disable. You can actually just kind of see like what the node's doing. Like it's like turning it on and off. That's not in the hypershade, unfortunately, but disable. Now, one thing about this, it's working, but when you end up doing this and kind of darkening the image, It's making the edges darker, but doesn't it kind of feel like the center
It's really
is
bright.
just like, well, we're losing a lot of intensity everywhere still. So one thing I kind of like to do anytime I'm doing a vignette is I like to put another exposure node before it to make the render brighter. So when I do darken it, at least it's not, too dark overall. It's almost like we're counterbalancing the vignette effect a little bit. Okay, so somewhere in here, just make another exposure, and they'll snap in place, by the way. So if you have an exposure off to the side, you just drag it over. You can see how it kind of highlights. It'll just click into position. Pop, right there. So there's an exposure above it. This guy, what I'm going to do is I'm still looking at my bottom one, but on the top exposure node, I'm going to raise this up. So I'm going to make the render a little brighter, so by the time it gets to the darkening effect, it's just not too dark. So let me kind of show you both these together. Like this one's just making it brighter. This is the one with the stuff connected into it that's going darker. Before, after. It's subtle, but I do kind of like the gradient. This seems almost like really flat when you kind of look back on the other one.
What did you say we have to do to the top one?
You just are making it a little bit brighter. Just use artistic discretion. Your renders are going to look a little different than mine, but just kind of get it knocked up a little bit so it feels like compositionally and lighting, you're sort of happy with the intensities everywhere. Because if you only have this guy doing something, it just might make your whole render too dark.
I have a question.
Yeah, question.
Is that little arrow on the radial gonna always be there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you guys probably all saw this weird little thing sticking out of it. I'll show you why it's like that. Because one way you can use the radial is it wants something going into it. Here's me connecting in my render into the radial. See how it kind of, it's like a layering effect where it thinks you want to layer the radial over top. We're not doing that. I don't know why you'd want to do that. So I know it's annoying seeing the guy hanging out, but just pretend it doesn't matter because it doesn't. All right, so we got the exposure working. Let's go back here to the docs. That's perfect. Now we get to depth of field. Add depth of field to your render with a Z to focus node. We want to focus on a very specific part of the frame. Now, I also want to save my script, by the way. We haven't done this at all yet. That would have been good. Let's go up to File, Save Comp, or Save Comp As. It's going to bring up a little window. Now, this is a little weird because Nuke's folder structure and how you click between them is not like Finder. You just want to single click. Try to find your directory. Now, mine, just by kind of chance, is going to where I want it to be. A lot of you guys, though, will probably notice yours is some random directory. What I usually do is you go to Home, just single click, don't double click. Home, and from here you can see like desktop, downloads, documents. I mean, you guys are probably putting your stuff in one of these guys, I'm guessing. Yeah, and like for me, mine's on my desktop right now, but desktop, lecture project, and I like to put them in the scripts folder in my actual Maya project. So all my Nuke stuff and the Maya stuff is all together in one spot. Well, because if you single click, it goes into it. So what happens if you start double clicking, you'll like accidentally jump ahead 2 folders by mistake. Yeah. So lecture project, scripts, I'm going to put it right here. And next to that, I'm going to just type in lecture Nuke, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. Save. So it's now saved. But Nuke doesn't crash very often. Now, if Nuke does crash, it's going to happen on this next step. Because the node we're using, Z to focus, is a little buggy depending on your operating system. And older versions of Nuke, it was really, really sketchy. Let's make the Z to focus first. So down here, hit Tab, make Z to focus. Here's what the inputs look like. Now, Z to focus is a filter node. It's kind of like a blur or something, or a sharpen. It just modifies the crispness of the render.
No pun intended.
Nope. And we have 2 inputs on it. I got a filter and an image. Now, we're not going to use the filter, but I do kind of want to show you what this is. It's kind of cool. This is what the filter could be used for. is stuff like this. So you guys have probably seen this effect before when you have like someone taking photography at night, like all the little bright light sources kind of get that disc shape, or it might turn to like a hexagon or a pentagon. It depends on like the camera and like the lens and the iris, but people will actually make custom shapes for this.
No, that's cool.
Like making things to focus into Christmas trees, or there's like unicorns in here somewhere. The king of Boca, I guess.
That's you, dude.
Hearts,
So that's made with Nuke and not the camera?
No, this is on the camera. You can see it. No, that's not it. There's
Wasn't there one like a little bit further up?
yeah, I probably went right by it.
That stormtrooper one.
What?
Stormtrooper one down there.
Stormtrooper.
Down. There was a Lego stormtrooper.
No, there with the blue lens on it. I think he has one of the covers on it, and that one too.
Oh yeah, like there. See the shape? It's like a little. It's like something blocking the lens. But that cutout shape is just like a filter over it. That's actually causing the light to come in like through a pattern, and it'll do that effect if you take a picture. No, we're not doing that. We're not having you guys to focus the shot into like My Little Pony or something, but this would be where you could put like a black and white alpha, like a black and white image of whatever you wanted to focus as. That would go in here, and it would kind of do that. We're just using the image though, so just grab image, drag it up to the exposure. The image is going to go into it. Now, let's look at the defocus. Click on hit 1. You can tell it's really blurry.
Oh, yeah.
So everything's out of focus. It doesn't understand what it's looking at quite yet, but it is doing something. Now, over here on the attributes of the exposure node, is anyone getting like a weird visual artifact, like colored horizontal banding lines? Okay, I'm going to pretend like someone said yes. Just for the sake of the recording, if anyone notices when you look at the Z to focus that the whole render is not just out of focus, you're going to get these weird colored lines. You'll know when it's broken because it's going to look like a weird graphical error. The problem is on the Z to focus. It's this guy right here. It's trying to do GPU rendering, like using your graphics card, and depending on your graphics card, it might cause some complications. Like if it's an out of date, ATI, you'll kind of know if it's busted. But just if it's good, you can leave it on. At the top though, it says what channels do you want it to focus. All's fine. We do want to blur the whole thing. Now it needs to know how to blur it, like where the distance is. How do we tell Maya or Nuke where objects are in distance? Yeah, didn't we rendered a pass called Z, which is depth. So it's already built into this thing. Now let me just make sure the depth is working, because the depth channel was way back in the original image. So let me just look at the read node of like the key light. There's depth, right? We didn't do anything with it yet, but there's been a depth pass hanging out in all these images. That's the one that was like solid red.
Okay.
It's working. Now, what you want to make sure here is, did that depth pass make it all the way down to this guy? Let's look at the Z to focus.
No.
It's still there. And it looks red. So I'm just showing you that because sometimes, depending on how you made your script, one of your initial channels may not make it to the bottom. And so you might have to like copy it to reappear down here. Now, the way we're doing it, the depth pass made it the whole way through the script. So it is in the Z to focus. That's good because if you look at the Z to focus node, depth channel, depth.z. That is exactly what we have. So by default, it already knows what to look for, and it's there. So let me go back to color. It would be, we're going to change a couple settings here to like blur it more. The problem is we have to tell it where to focus. Now, watch what happens here. See that, you guys all see that little focal point thing hanging out in your viewer? Okay. See that focused plane attribute on the tool? It's probably set to 0 right now unless you've moved it. Move the focal point. Just click on it, drag it around your render, and watch that attribute. You see the number changing?
All my blaring is good.
Yep. And then I'm going to drop it on the vial, like in the back. But drop it wherever you want. It went in focus, right? Things got really clear.
Yeah.
And if you look at that focus plane, see how it says the number 68? Again, watch me move this to the metal. 62. 41. The number is going to change because what is that number? It's pulling it from that depth image. And on that part of the pulley, that is 41 units from the camera. It's just the distance in Maya. If I drop it on the wall, that's 80 units from the camera. Yeah, and depending on where you put it, you'll see things go out of focus more or less. Let's put it on the, let's do like that spacer. Let's drop it on that guy. Now, one problem is we lost a lot of the depth of field effect, right? It's kind of like pretty tame. I want to crank it up a little bit. So what we're going to do is over here, it's coming from the size and the maximum, not this. I know this looks tempting. Depth of field, that's what I want. Don't do that. It's these two guys. Think of it kind of like doing a Gaussian blur in Photoshop. You make the Gaussian blur amount bigger. It just blurs the image more. That's essentially what these guys are. Now, these typically, when I do it, have the same number. They kind of do the same thing, where it's like one is clipping it at 10 pixels. This is you setting how many pixels it blurs. I just kind of like to leave these the same. So I'll show you guys a trick on how you can link attributes together. On the right here, see that little curve button? Just kind of left click on it. Watch what it pops up. This is how you set keyframes in Nuke over here. So you can, it's like graph editor. You can key everything and move things around. But on the size, what you're going to do, if you hold down Command on your keyboard, hold down Command, left click drag that curve icon to the one below it. Oh, mine's freaking out. There we go. And you'll see a little plus pop up. Release. That is now linked from that guy. Let me back up. So I'm holding down Command. Hold down Command. Drag it to the one beneath it. It's freaking out on my screen because I'm zoomed in, but once you kind of put it over the other curve, it should click and link it.
How do you unlink it?
If you ever want to unlink it, because you see how it's turned blue, right click and do I think no animation. I think that removes, yeah, that gets rid of it. And I'll kind of show you what this is. I know this seems like some weird wizardry here. If you ever want to see like what that is, look how basic, because this is like a script. It's just a basic expression. Look how simple this expression is. If you do edit expression, that's all it is. The expression is size. That attribute name, you type it in there, it does that. So if I do something like, I don't know if it's going to read that one with the space. Let me see if it reads depth of field. No, I bet that's not listed that way. I don't know what that one's listed as. Oh no. Yeah, that one, like if I link it, what is it calling this guy? Oh, DOF. Okay. So there we go. They're all linked. Now what I'm going to do is on size, let's crank that guy up. Let's do a 50 pixel blur. Type in 50 on size. It's going to change both. Now give this a second. It takes a minute. Because now we're doing some pretty intense math right now. Okay. Now, you'll notice that it did do depth of field. Now, does anything look weird?
The scraper.
Yeah. Doesn't it almost have, like, it's not out of focus, like you have bad vision?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Stop looking at
So, what's that? Say it again. Yeah. It's focusing on it. Yeah, but the problem though, if you kind of start zooming in here, see this weird halo effect going on? Not the alpha. Okay, and it's nothing that we've really done wrong at this point. The problem is something we didn't talk about with this math. So I know you guys love math, but so math, what is this thing doing? Remember when we were talking about depth passes and kind of how they work, depth passes all look different depending on how you render them. Like, what does our depth pass look like? It's just that solid red color, right? Like a lot of bright colors. Here's what depth passes look like if you just do a search in Google. White to black. Black to white. It's cool looking. Like this is typically how you see them in like movie breakdowns because you can see it. Yep, and it has like a fog effect. But these are what depth passes typically look like when you see them online. But you can tell there's different variations: white to black, black to white. We don't have any of these. We got some weird bright red color thing going on. So this is kind of why it's breaking. Nuke doesn't know which one we're picking. We have to tell Nuke which one of the depth passes we're using. Now, far equals 0. You can kind of see what it's saying. Far equals 0 is the distance. It's basically saying that the farthest point is 0 or black. This is the one that does white to black in the background. Far equals 1 is black to white. The one we're doing, though, is just called depth. Depth Z is distance in front of camera. So put it to depth. As soon as you do that, just kind of give it a second. It's got to recalculate it. You'll notice all those weird halo problems we were having before, like all that stuff goes away. It was just bad math. It didn't have the pass set up properly. Oh yeah, it's like really out of focus. Now you want to be careful about this because when you do it this way, you are blurring it. You're telling it to do a 50 pixel blur. That doesn't mean that's what you should be doing to it. Like I'm just cranking it up, and what we've unfortunately done is this. We did this stuff, which is like macro photography. You know, like that's kind of what's happening in our render right now. Like really small scale, like a raindrop where this is in focus and it goes out of focus very quickly. We did that to our project. But just think of the scale that we see this at. This is really small scale effects. So when you do that type of blurring to this, what it's doing is, doesn't that kind of feel like these are almost miniatures? Like the whole set is like within that.
Oh yeah, wow.
Right?
It's really cool. It even looks like a workbook book in the background.
Yep, it'll blur it a little bit. This is a thing that some people do called tilt shift photography. And some of you have probably seen this before, but
Oh, it's like super
It
midnight.
looks like
yeah, that's a real city corner.
It's like toys.
Yeah, that's a real city. Those are real people. It's just because of the way they're using like the special lens for it, it puts it out of focus like it's a miniature. But that's a real location.
What if you lose your image because you zoomed in and zoomed out and then it ran away?
If you hit F, it'll refocus it. Yep. All right. So we don't want to do that. It's cool looking, but we don't need to do that in Nuke. You're not impressing people with your tilt shift photography skills. We are just trying to get a believable depth of field. Let's try doing something like 15, like, ease it back quite a bit. It's faster too when you have a lower number. And now, because this is all set up right, if you move the focal point, I can say, all right, I want to focus on the book in the front. It's focused on the wall, the scraper. It'll just update wherever you move the focal point. It's pretty cool. This is really expensive to render in Maya, because Maya has this in it. Do not render with depth of field in Maya. It'll take like a 20-minute render and turn it into like 2 hours.
Oh.
Yeah, it's much, much faster in Nuke, and it still looks pretty good. So this could be kind of useful for some of you guys if you're doing like character modeling, because you can keyframe this. We could have a camera going up the side of the character, and you could actually keyframe the focal point, so it's focused on the arm, and then when you get to a certain height, it jumps back to the head, and then puts that in focus, and the arm goes out of focus. So this can all be keyframed, and all you're doing is keying those numbers right there, or the focus point. You can just put a key on it. Okay, so there's depth of field. Let's go back here. Okay, so we just got through the first part of the whole project. This was the hardest part of it, is getting the whole script set up. We now want to render this out as our first image out of Nuke.
What should we have focused for like
Focusing on the vial's label, which is about 55 to 70 units from the camera. So you are going to focus on the vial. Now you can change it later on if you want it, because we're doing a second image, and you can pick a different part of the shot you want to focus on. But I'll put it on the vial like we were talking about. There we go. Now I want to render this one out of Nuke. So on the Z to focus, hit W or make a right node. W is just a shortcut. Make right, read and write. Okay, make a right. And over here in the right node, this is where you just pick where do you want to save it. So I'm going to, under File, let's hit that little folder button. This thing pops up. And yeah, my images folder's fine. It's in the same, oh, that's actually not the right one. Sorry, I'm in the wrong directory. Back.
So there's no way to like set a project or do stuff like that?
There is under the settings. I didn't do that, but you can just pick your directory, figure out where you want to put it.
Would it break it if we saved it on the desktop?
Nope. I'm going to go to my images, I guess. Apparently I have a UV snapshot in here for some reason. And under images, let's see, this one is called, what did I name that guy? Final render. Okay. So let's do that real quick. So this is final render. Put the file extension, targa.tga. You have to put .targa. Don't just leave it empty, because Nuke won't put that on there for you. .targa. Save. Once you name it with .tga, you'll notice the file type automatically changes to targa. It knows what you're doing. Okay. Now, how do we render it? You hit the render button. That's it. And it'll render whatever is connected into it. So if I hit render, make sure it's set 1:1. It's probably set that way for everybody, but in older versions of the Nuke, it used to be defaulting to this. Do not ever put it to 1 to 100. It will do exactly what you think it's going to do. It will render, that's a sequence. It's going to render your image 100 times and put it on your desktop. I made the mistake once of doing that, and my whole desktop just like went crazy with like files just sitting on top of files. It was a mess.
What's that continue on error little box?
It basically means if Nuke runs into an error, like you know how some of you guys had error things popping up on the copy node earlier? If there was a part of the script that was broken, if you have continue on error, Nuke will try to keep rendering it even if something's busted. And if I look at it, let's just make sure it looks right. So let's back up. Desktop, lecture, images. There it is. There's my image. It looks just like what we had in Nuke. Okay. I'm going to save my script again. All right, so that is the first part. Now, the only thing we haven't done are this last two steps here. And this is the part where I'm going to let you guys just kind of like experiment. I want you to kind of be creative and just play around with a few different things in Nuke. You can turn in multiple renders of this if you want, if you have a couple ideas. But I want to do some modifications to the shot, like change the lighting, change the materials. We didn't really do that. All we did is add a couple camera effects and make a comp and render it out. But part 10 is where we can play around with things, like making the metal a different color. And to do this, like we'll start with the metal. If we kind of go way up here, we're going to go back up to the top where we had the passes. And just, by the way, if we end up going just a little over with the lecture, I'll push out the lab, attendance. I just want to make sure we get all this. So if I want to modify the materials, you know how we did these shuffles a long time ago to like break apart all these guys? Yeah. Now I want to change the metal. So what passes are the metal pieces contained in? Like they're clearly not in diffuse, right? But they are in the spec because metal is reflective. These are the ones we're trying to affect, these two guys. I'm just looking at the key light right now. Now let's say that we wanted to color correct these. I'm going to use a grade node to do that. So we used exposure to do lighting stuff earlier with like the vignette. We're going to use a grade node. So just kind of click on your direct spec. I'm under the key light still. Just make a grade node or hit G. You'll see it pop under it. So this is going to a grade node. Now on the grade node, this is kind of like levels. And I kind of mentioned some of these: black point, white point, lift, gain, gamma. I mean, you're looking at the levels tool, but it's just displayed differently. The only one you guys are worried about is we want to change the color and tint it. We want to use what's called multiply. Now watch, I'm going to be back up here. Look at the render. I'm just going to take, and I'm viewing the grade. Make sure you're viewing the grade node so you can see it. Watch what happens when I just grab the multiply slider and move it around. See, it's kind of like the exposure when we did that. It just makes things brighter and darker. It's the same exact thing. But on this guy, if I hit the color wheel on the right, this shows you now individual color adjustments for multiply. Now you could grab the color channels and start moving them around individually. What I usually do though is when you hit the little color wheel, click on that white circle in the middle of the color wheel and just drag out. And we're changing the tint. Hit the little color wheel next to the multiply attribute to the right. And if you click on the wheel's little white dot, you can kind of click and drag and spin it around and pick different. Saturation is like when you go to the outside, that's richer. It's paler in the middle. And if you spin it around, which is kind of freaking out right now, that is changing the hue. Okay, so I'm just going to make it like a, yeah, we'll do something like red or something for right now. I like it. Okay.
Is there any reason my little wheel, like little circle, is red?
Is red?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. You must have broke it. Is the red channel not even changing? Oh, yeah. Take the red slider. See where it says 0? Or what is this? Yeah, put it. What does that red slider say? 11? Put it to 1. It might be like you cranked it up so high that it went off the screen and it's not working anymore. Or do like 0.5 and try dragging it around again, see if it changes. Like grab the white dot.
My dot is red. That was my question.
Yeah, that just delete the grade node. Try making a new one.
Just throw up.
I don't know why the dot would be turning red. I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as you can get the color to turn the color you want. You're fine. You can still move the sliders around. Now the issue here is, remember, I'm trying to change the metal, and let's look at what's happened. I changed. It's kind of a cool looking effect, but I made all the spec highlights turn that color. We want those guys. If only I had something that could we have those alphas, right? We made all those ID alphas. We never used them. They're still here, just waiting for me to do something. Now, because those are built into the image, like remember when we did the mask with the vignette, I had to make this radial on the side and connect it all, awkwardly. This is even easier because I don't have to make it. It's already here. We did this a long time ago. We made the alphas. They're just waiting to be used. So on the grade node, if you look at the bottom, there's a mask where it says none. Hit the drop down, pick your metal alpha, and watch the render. Ooh. Amazing, right?
Mind is blown.
Mic drop. So, and you can pick any of them. Like, let me see if I do the pulley. It's now the pulley. Scraper.
Oh man, this is one of the
sexiest
sexiest programs ever.
I kind of thought you guys would like this. So once you do that, it changes it to the metal. Now let me look at the merge plus where they all come back together. Does it look like it's changing to the right color?
Yeah.
Kinda. What's wrong with it?
It's just
It's
an
too
album.
red.
It's just a spec.
Looks like blood.
That guy, right? We didn't change the indirect spec.
So you just copy it?
I could.
Chill out, bro.
Now if you're kind of right though. If I copied it and moved it over there, they would both do the same thing, right? Because you're making a duplicate. What happens though if you have an art director say, I wanted that metal to be green?
Indirect green.
Aren't you now going to 2 different nodes and trying to pick the same color again? Right? That's not fun.
Can't you just change the arrow into the grade node? Can you just connect the indirect species into that grade node?
Like put this into that guy? You cannot. I mean, because it only has one input. It was a good guess though. So there's something in Nuke called a clone. We want to clone it. So copy was Alt C. Cloned is supposed to be C, but we ran out of letters here. So it's if you click on that, do Alt K.
Okay.
It's called the K.
Okay.
That's good.
Yep. This is a clone. Now the clone, you can already tell it's a little different because look at the name of the nodes. Grade 1. That's also grade 1. It is literally the same node in 2 locations. So what you do is you just drag that back and snap it under the other specular render. Forget that thing to sit there. There we go. And now that one turns red. They're both.
It's like blood red. That's amazing.
There we go. Now, because we're kind of doing all this stuff in Nuke, is a lot of like 2D tricks. You can only push this so far. Okay, look at what is like standing out that looks a little off when you really start analyzing the render.
It's just red.
It's red. Look at the reflection on the book.
It's
Yeah. So the reflection doesn't understand that it's supposed to change color. Now, if this was a problem, like one, I shouldn't have made that drastic of a color adjustment. Like that's part of the issue. But if you really had to do that, what I would also have to do is probably on the book do some type of like radial effect in here to tint that reflection the same red. So that way, like even the reflection has the same color. Now, what we can do though is, since I want that same effect on these guys, I'm just going to click on that because it has to be on every light. Alt-K, drag this over, snap it under that spec. Alt-K, others. I'm just like cloning it with Alt-K and putting that under the spec passes for each light. Alt-K. Alt-K. So what this means is now if I look at the fill light, see how that's changing color too? And they're all linked together. Dome light, changing color. So now if I look at the final, there it is. It's changing color on everything. And the cool part about this is now that they're all linked, you can go to that color and change it to whatever you want. Okay. Anything you want. If I could pick like a copper and do something like that, a little more subtle. Okay.
I have it connected under direct spec.
You have it under indirect spec. I'll check it out in the lab. Okay. Now the last thing I want to do before we get you guys out of here is we now need to do the lights. And we're going to change. This is again something you guys can play around with. So the lights. Think about where you affect the lights. So these are the passes. But here, that's one light. That's one of the lights. So if I drop anything below those merges, you're affecting one light. So watch this. I can use an exposure node, and if I click it underneath these guys, I'm going to make a copy, drop it there, copy, drop it over here. I'm just dropping an exposure node under those merges. Okay. Watch. Here's me looking at the key light. Go to the exposure. You know how last time when we did the exposure, it was just like intensity back and forth? If you uncheck gang, because gang means they move together like a gang. Now each slider's independent. So what I'm going to do is make this a night shot. So let's do a night shot. Night shot, what should the key light be doing, you think? Like if this was like a moonlight shot. Like way darker, right? We're talking about not having skylights coming through. So let's pull that back. I'm going to uncheck gang. I'm going to move the blue up and push kind of a bluer with a hint of green. So we get this kind of like a cool moonlight. Like that. Now, if the moonlight's blue, like you know how the dome light is like faking like a bounce light within the room? It's like a filler almost. I kind of want this to also match one of these lights, like whatever light I think is bouncing. But let me get this guy fixed. Because if this was a night shot, and if it's that dark outside, what should the light bulb be doing? Like way brighter, right? Because that's now the main light source. So on this exposure, I could then crank it up. And I could start playing around with colors. I could be like, all right, this is a weird, we're going to do a green light. Some kind of creepy green.
This is like, that's like a scene from the game Outlast.
Yep. Say,
so depressed.
Okay. And if once you get the color the way you want it, green or red, whatever you're kind of going for, if you turn gang back on, you're now back to moving intensity. So gang, when it's turned on, is intensity. When it's unchecked, you move individual channels.
Can you guys
Now, because I've made that red, doesn't it feel a little weird where the fill light is like this kind of grayish green and that light bulb is supposed to be on? So probably what I would do even on this guy, I could probably even just like take my exposure on the warm light or that fill light and just copy it for this guy and then just take the intensity and just pull that back a little bit. It's probably a little purple, so I might need to pull some blue out of that guy. And now I'm controlling the fill. So I'm not too crazy about the colors I picked for this one, but that's now changing the lighting. And if I disable all the exposures, we started with that. We're doing all this like right in Nuke, just changing color.
Good. I have a question.
Yeah, question.
Could we change the intensity of the light?
Yeah, I already was doing that. Like if you double click on the exposure, just if gang's turned on and you move it, that's intensity.
Okay.
So if they all move together, you are doing intensity.
Gotcha.
So maybe for this one, I think it does look a little bit better if that actually was a little brighter instead of it being like so faint. I kind of like the shadow effect still too. So yeah, just use those guys to change the light's color and intensity. And I just want you guys to play around with it, see what you can kind of come up with. And you're going to render out your second image from that. So this modified one with the different metal color, the different lights, that's your second render you're going to save out. You just change the name on the right node to modified render, save it out. Okay? Let me save my script. So that's what you guys are going to be doing for that part of the activity.